The HOA fined me for refusing to pay HOA fees on my own fishing boat, a boat I'd used to teach my daughter to fish. Then the power-hungry president banned me from the water, creating her own exclusive fishing club just to rub it in my face. She thought she had all the power, but she had no idea about my revenge plan. I didn't just fight her. I bought the entire lake and personally evicted her whole club. But even she couldn't have predicted the secret I was about to expose that proved her entire reign was built on a lie from the very beginning. Where are you watching this story from? Drop it in the comments below because this takedown is epic. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a fake tyrant, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss the moment they get exactly what they deserve. The lake was my church, my sanctuary. My late wife Sarah had picked this spot years ago, a little house with a patch of land that sloped right down to the water. The boat wasn't much, a 14-foot aluminum hull with a tired motor, but it was ours. It was where I taught my daughter, Lily, how to bait a hook, and where I found a sliver of peace after 20 years of service. On that Tuesday morning, the air was crisp, and the water was like glass. I was pulling the boat out for its annual maintenance, a routine I knew by heart. The winch whined, the trailer creaked, and soon enough, the old girl was sitting on my driveway ready for a good cleaning. I was covered in grease and lake water, feeling that quiet satisfaction of a job done with your own hands, when I saw the letter stuck to my front door. It was in a crisp, white envelope, sealed with an official-looking sticker bearing the HOA's logo, a generic smiling sun over a perfectly manicured lawn. The sticker was already peeling. I wiped my hands on my jeans and tore it open. The words inside felt like a slap in the face. Final notice. Unpaid HOA fees. Watercraft. According to the letter, I owed them $350. For what? For owning a boat. For having it sit in my own driveway for a few hours. I read the sentence 3 times, trying to make it make sense. It was signed by Karen Whitman, HOA president, a woman who patrolled the neighborhood in a golf cart like a warden in a minimum security prison. When I showed the letter to my wife, Martha, she let out a long sigh. "Jack, just pay it," she said, her voice laced with the weariness of someone who knew a fight was coming. "It's not worth the headache. You know how she is." I looked out the kitchen window at the boat, a dent in its side from the year Lily, then 7, tried to dock it herself. Every scratch held a memory. It's not about the money, Martha. It's theft. There's no rule in the bylaws about boat fees. I checked when we moved in. This is just her making things up. Martha put a hand on my arm. And you think pointing that out will make her back down? She thrives on this stuff. She lives for the drama. I knew she was right, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. This wasn't about a cracked sidewalk or grass that was half an inch too long. This was about my boat, our boat. It was a piece of my history with Sarah, a piece of my connection to my daughter. Paying the fine felt like admitting that Karen's fake power was real, that she had a right to put a price tag on my peace. "I'm just going to talk to her," I told Martha. "I'll be reasonable. Show her the bylaws. It's probably a misunderstanding." Martha didn't look convinced. She'd seen Karen in action at community meetings, her voice sharp and condescending, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of defiance. The next day, I went to the community clubhouse during the HOA's designated office hours. Karen sat behind a cheap folding table, a stack of papers arranged in perfect menacing piles. Next to her was Linda Park, a board member who served as Karen's loyal shadow, nodding at everything she said. I calmly placed the fine on the table. "Karen, I think there's been a mistake," I started. "I've reviewed the bylaws, and there's no provision for fees on privately owned watercraft." Karen didn't even look at the paper. She pushed her glasses up her nose and gave me a smile that was all teeth. "Mr. Miller, the board has broad authority to levy fees for the maintenance and aesthetic upkeep of the community. Your vessel," she said the word like it was something foul, "is a concern." I held my ground. "It's a fishing boat, Karen, and it was on my property. It's not a community concern, Linda chimed in, her voice annoyingly high. The boat is visible from the road, which makes it an aesthetic issue. And we have reports it was leaking oil on your driveway, which is an environmental concern. My blood ran cold. It was a bald-faced lie. I was an electrician by trade, but I knew my way around a motor better than most mechanics. My boat didn't leak a drop. That's not true, I said, my voice dangerously low. Karen just shrugged, a picture of false sympathy. Well, that's what was reported. The fine stands. And it's $500 now, with the late fee. I was stunned into silence. She was doubling down, inventing new lies on the spot. The meeting was over before it began. The harassment didn't stop there. A few days later, a notice was taped to my garage door, a warning that my boat would be towed if not stored in an approved facility. My own garage wasn't good enough, apparently. Then came the inspections. I'd find Linda Park walking the edge of my property, a clipboard in hand, making notes. She'd take pictures of my boat from the street, trying to act official. It felt like I was being watched, stalked. I tried to talk to some of my neighbors, but most of them just shook their heads and looked away. Just let it go, Jack, one of them told me, his voice a whisper. You can't win. She'll just make your life a living hell. He was right. At the next community meeting, Karen made sure to publicly shame me. She stood at the front of the room and announced, "We have some residents who believe the rules don't apply to them." She didn't say my name, but every eye in the room turned to me. Their delinquency puts a strain on our budget and affects everyone. My face burned with a quiet rage. I wanted to stand up and call her out for the liar she was, but I knew it was useless. This was her court, and she was the judge, jury, and executioner. As I drove home that night, the hope I had for a reasonable solution was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Martha was right. Karen didn't want fairness. She wanted control. She wanted to break me. I looked over at the lake, shimmering under the moonlight. That was my territory, my home. And I wasn't going to let some power-hungry bully with a clipboard push me out. I knew I couldn't just roll over, but as I sat there in the dark, I had to admit, I had no idea how I was going to fight her. She had her rules, her board, her intimidation tactics. All I had was the truth, and I was starting to realize that wasn't nearly enough. My garage workshop has always been my place to think. The smell of solder and old wood calms me down. I figured I'd treat the HOA problem like a bad wiring job. Find the source of the short circuit and fix it. So I spent the next week with the HOA covenants, conditions and restrictions spread out across my workbench. It was 100 pages of dense, mind-numbing legal jargon, designed to make your eyes glaze over. But I read every single word. I highlighted sections, made notes in the margins, and cross-referenced amendments. Martha would bring me coffee, her expression a mix of support and worry. "Find anything?" she'd ask. For days, the answer was no. It felt like trying to navigate a maze built by lawyers. But then, on the third night, I found it. Buried in an appendix detailing property boundaries was a single, beautiful sentence. The association's jurisdiction extends to all common areas, ending at the high water mark of the lake. I read it again and again. That was it. That was the whole game. The HOA didn't own the lake. They didn't own the docks. Their authority literally stopped at the water's edge. The fines, the threats, the entire foundation of Karen's power over the lake was a complete lie. She was running a bluff, counting on the fact that no one would ever bother to read page 87 of Appendix C. Armed with this, I felt a surge of confidence. My first step wasn't to confront Karen directly. That would be like walking into an ambush. Instead, I started talking to my neighbors, one by one. I caught George next door while he was watering his petunias. I showed him the line in the bylaws. He squinted at the paper, then looked over his shoulder nervously. "Yeah, but Jack, is this really a hill you want to die on?" Karen holds a grudge. She'll find something else to fine you for. The color of your mailbox, the length of your driveway. Just pay the boat thing and make it go away. It was the same story with almost everyone. They hated the HOA. They hated Karen's petty tyranny, but they were too scared to do anything about it. They'd been conditioned to comply. Word got back to Karen fast. The whisper campaign started immediately. At the community mailbox, I'd see a group of her allies fall silent as I approached. Linda Park started telling people I was planning to sue the neighborhood, that I was a disruptive element. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The worst part was how it affected my family. Lily came home from school one day looking crushed. "Dad, Ashley's mom said you're trying to get our pool shut down." Ashley was one of Karen's kids. "That's not true, sweetie." I told her, my heart aching. But the damage was done. The community that once felt like home now felt like hostile territory. Martha's worry grew into a constant, quiet anxiety. "They put a lien on the Hendersons' house last year over a satellite dish, Jack," she told me one night, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't risk this house. Not for a stupid fine." I understood her fear, but backing down now felt like surrendering a piece of my soul. I knew I needed a small victory. Something to show people that Karen wasn't invincible. I got my chance a week later. A new fine appeared on my door, this time for improperly stored gardening equipment. Apparently, my wheelbarrow was visible from the street for 2 whole hours. It was ridiculous, a clear act of retaliation. But this time I was ready. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I simply wrote a polite, formal letter to the board. In it, I quoted Article 4, Section 2.1 of the bylaws, which clearly stated that temporary placement of tools during active yard work was permitted. I attached a time-stamped photo of my half-finished flower bed. I sent the letter via certified mail. 2 weeks later, I received a quiet, unsigned note in my mailbox stating the fine was rescinded. It wasn't a public apology, but it was a win. George saw me at the fence that weekend. He gave me a slow nod. "Heard you beat the wheelbarrow fine," he said, a small smile on his face. Another neighbor, a quiet retiree named Bill, came by and asked if I could look at a fine he'd gotten for his bird feeder. We found a loophole for that too. A tiny crack was forming in Karen's wall of authority. People started to see that the rules weren't absolute. They were a weapon she used. And sometimes, you could take that weapon away. Karen felt the shift too. She must have realized her strategy of nickel and diming me into submission wasn't working. So she decided to escalate. Drastically. An email went out to the entire neighborhood, announcing the formation of the Lakeside Fishing Club. It read, in a cheerful cursive font. It went on to describe an exclusive new club for members in good standing with the HOA. Membership included priority access to the docks, a key to the new gate being installed at the boat ramp, and invitations to club-only events. The price for this privilege? A non-refundable initiation fee of $500 and annual dues of $200. Any boat launched into the lake would now require a club-issued permit sticker, available only to members. I read the email 3 times, the words blurring with rage. This wasn't about aesthetics or community upkeep anymore. This was a direct, personal attack. She was trying to legally lock me out of my own sanctuary. She was monetizing the lie, building a private kingdom on land she didn't even control. It wasn't about the boat fine anymore. It was about the lake. My lake. And as I stared at the email, a new, far bigger plan began to form in my mind. She wanted to play for control? Fine. We'd play. But we wouldn't be playing for a few $100s. We'd be playing for keeps. Karen's fishing club email wasn't just a new rule. It was a declaration of war. She thought we were fighting over a $300 fine. I realized then that I had been thinking too small. Fighting her with her own bylaws was like trying to put out a forest fire with a squirt gun. She'd just keep starting new fires. To win, I had to change the entire landscape. I had to take away the forest, My first stop wasn't a lawyer's office. It was the county records building downtown. It's a gray, soulless place that smells of old paper and stale coffee. But as an electrician, I've spent countless hours looking at property deeds and plat maps to run new service lines. I knew how to read the language of land. For 2 days, I sat at a dusty terminal, scrolling through digital copies of deeds going back 100 years. I was looking for the original parcel of land that included the lake. I traced its history, watching it get subdivided and sold off over decades. Finally, I found what I was looking for. The lake itself, the land beneath it, and a 50-foot perimeter around the shore had never been turned over to the developer who built our neighborhood. It was still owned by a separate entity, the Blackwood Water and Land Trust. A quick search told me everything I needed to know. The trust was ancient, set up by the original farming family who owned this whole valley. The family had died out generations ago. The trust was now managed by a sleepy, out-of-state bank that probably forgot it even existed. It was a ghost on the county books, a forgotten asset. It was a dormant entity, and dormant entities sometimes sell things they don't realize they have. That night, I laid it all out for Martha at the kitchen table. The maps, the deeds, the trust information. Her face went pale as she understood what I was proposing. "Jack, you're not serious," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "We can't buy a lake. What would that even cost? We have Lily's college fund. We have our retirement." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Martha, this is about more than money. This is about them coming into our life and telling us where we can and can't go. That lake, that's where Sarah and I scattered some of her mom's ashes. It's where I took Lily to get her mind off things when Sarah passed. Karen is trying to turn that place into her own private country club. I can't let that happen." The air grew heavy with unspoken memories. Martha knew I was right, but the risk was terrifying. "How?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Even if it's for sale, we don't have that kind of cash just sitting around." That's when I made a call I hadn't made in years. Tom Reynolds, Sarge, was my team leader back in the service. We'd been through hell together. Now, he ran a successful logistics company a few towns over. I met him at a Greasy Spoon diner halfway between our houses. I laid out the situation, the HOA, Karen, the fake fishing club. Sarge listened without saying a word, just sipping his black coffee. He hated bullies and bureaucracies more than anyone I knew. When I got to the part about the dormant trust, he leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "So, you want to buy the pond and kick the queen bee off her throne?" he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "That's the plan. It's a bold move, Jack. A damned good one. But it'll be noisy once she finds out. You ready for that?" I nodded. "I am now." I told him what I had in savings and what I thought I'd need to make a credible offer. He didn't hesitate. "I'm in," he said, pushing his empty cup away. "Consider it a business loan. Veteran to veteran. Just send me the paperwork. And Jack," he added, his voice turning serious, "make her pay for every bit of it." While the lawyers I hired, through Sarge's recommendation, were quietly putting together the offer, Karen grew more suspicious. My sudden compliance probably unnerved her. I stopped challenging her. I paid the original boat fine without comment. But my silence was like gasoline on her fire. She needed a villain. The rumors started getting worse. Linda Park told people I was under investigation for illegal dumping in the lake. Another board member whispered that I was facing financial trouble and was going to be foreclosed on. They were trying to isolate me completely. The real blow came one Friday afternoon. Lily was supposed to go fishing with her friends down at the dock. She came back an hour later, her fishing rod dragging behind her, her face streaked with tears. I ran out to meet her on the porch. "What's wrong, sweetie? What happened?" Through sobs, she told me the story. Karen's daughter and her friends were there, all wearing their new Lakeside Fishing Club t-shirts. They stood in a line on the dock and wouldn't let Lily pass. They told her this was members-only property now. They called her a trespasser. Then, they called her dad a deadbeat who didn't pay his bills. One of them knocked her tackle box over, sending her favorite lures scattering. My vision went red. A cold, surgical rage settled over me. This had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I held my daughter, rocking her gently as she cried, and looked out at the lake. It shimmered in the afternoon sun, indifferent. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over me so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. What was I doing? I was putting my family's savings, our home, and my daughter's happiness on the line to fight this woman. Was it worth it? Was I just making everything worse for the people I was trying to protect? Then I felt Lily's small hand clutch my shirt. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't want to fish anymore, Dad." That was it. That was the moment the war became real. My doubt evaporated, replaced by absolute certainty. Karen hadn't just pushed me. She had hurt my child. She had tried to steal a precious part of our family's joy. My secret prep was no longer just a clever plan. It was a promise. A promise that I was going to take back that lake and tear her little kingdom down piece by rotten piece. The week after Lily was bullied on the dock, a new gate went up at the boat ramp. It was a heavy-duty steel thing, painted an obnoxious forest green to match the HOA's signage. A shiny new padlock, and a sign that read, "Lakeside Fishing Club Members Only," completed the picture. I'd watch from my back window as Karen and her little club paraded down to the water on weekends. They'd have barbecues on the shore, their laughter carrying across the water, a deliberate and constant reminder that I was an exile in my own backyard. They weren't even fishing half the time, they were just performing their victory for me to see. The pressure was becoming unbearable. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts. A fine for a garbage can left out an hour too long. A violation notice because a single weed was visible in my flower bed. Each letter was another twist of the knife, another drain on our savings and our sanity. Martha started doing the grocery shopping in the next town over, just to avoid the cold stares and whispers in the aisles. The weight of it all was crushing me. The savings account I'd built over 20 years was draining fast. Split between my lawyer handling the lake purchase and the stream of bogus fines I was forced to pay just to keep them from putting a lien on my house. The easy confidence I had after finding the loophole in the bylaws was gone, replaced by a gnawing dread. I started to wonder if I'd made a catastrophic mistake, betting our family's future on a high-stakes power play that was failing spectacularly. The final nail in the coffin was the community vote. Karen called a special meeting, framing it as an emergency session, to address escalating legal threats against the community. The clubhouse was packed. She stood at the podium, a picture of manufactured concern. She spun a tale of how my aggressive and litigious behavior was threatening the neighborhood's insurance policy and driving down property values. She claimed her fishing club was a way to protect the lake from misuse and ensure it remained a pristine asset for paying members in good standing. She was a master manipulator, twisting my fight for my rights into an attack on everyone else's investment. She proposed a vote to formally grant the Lakeside Fishing Club exclusive management rights over all lake access points. It was a public loyalty test. Voting against her would mean siding with me, the troublemaker. When she called for the vote, a sea of hands went up in her favor. I saw George from next door raise his hand, his eyes fixed on the floor. Bill, the old man I'd helped, kept his hands in his lap, but he was one of only 3. The vote passed, 47-3. I felt every eye in the room on me, a mixture of pity and triumph. I walked out without a word, the sound of Karen's smug "thank you" echoing behind me. That night was my lowest point. I sat in my workshop, the legal documents for the lake purchase spread out before me. It was the final contract. All I had to do was sign and wire the rest of the funds from Sarge's loan, but I couldn't pick up the pen. The isolation was absolute. My own neighbors had publicly sided with my tormentor. My daughter wouldn't even look at the lake anymore. Martha was trying to be strong, but I saw the fear in her eyes every time she looked at me. I was losing. Worse, I was dragging my family down with me. Maybe the neighbors were right. Maybe it was a hill I shouldn't die on. I thought about calling Sarge, telling him I was out. It was too much. The fight was over. As I sat there, staring at the unsigned papers, there was a soft knock on the workshop door. It was Bill. He was holding 2 beers. He didn't say anything, just handed one to me and took a seat on an old stool. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. "Reminds me of a foreman I had back at the plant," Bill said finally, his voice raspy. "Little man with a little bit of power. Loved to make life hell for anyone who wouldn't kiss his ring. He'd write guys up for being 30 seconds late, measure their sideburns with a ruler, you name it." He took a long sip of his beer. Most guys just kept their heads down. They had families to feed. Can't blame them. But every time we let him get away with one little thing, he'd take 3 more the next week. The fence around his power got a little bigger, and the world for the rest of us got a little smaller. He looked over at me, his eyes clear and steady. People like that, they don't stop. They feed on fear. They count on good people getting tired. "This isn't about your boat anymore, Jack. It never was. It's about that fence. You're the only one with the guts to try and tear it down." He finished his beer and stood up. "I can't tell you what to do, but I know a lot of people in this neighborhood are watching you, and they're hoping like hell you don't give up." He placed the empty bottle on my workbench and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I sat there for a long time, his words echoing in the quiet workshop. He was right. I had been so focused on my own battle, my own humiliation, that I'd forgotten why I started. It wasn't just for me. It was for every person who had ever been bullied by someone with a clipboard and a fancy title. I picked up the pen. The scratching sound it made on the thick paper was the only sound in the room. I signed my name, the ink dark and permanent. I took a picture of the signed page and sent it to my lawyer with a simple message. "It's done. Close it." The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A cold, quiet resolve. The war wasn't over. I had just reloaded. The monthly HOA meeting, 2 weeks later, was Karen's victory lap. The agenda she'd emailed out was full of triumphant announcements about the successful launch of the Lakeside Fishing Club and new rules about landscaping that seemed aimed squarely at me. The clubhouse was buzzing with the energy of a ruler addressing her loyal subjects. Linda Park was handing out cookies at the door, beaming. Karen herself was holding court at the front, dressed in a sharp blazer, soaking in the praise from her followers. I walked in quietly and took a seat in the back row next to Bill. Martha was at my side, her hand resting on my knee, squeezing it gently. I didn't say a word, just watched the proceedings, with a calm I hadn't felt in months. The lake deed had been recorded at the county courthouse 3 days ago. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. Karen began the meeting with her usual condescending flair. "As you all know," she started, "we've had to take decisive action to protect the value and integrity of our beautiful community." She spent 10 minutes talking about the overwhelming success of the fishing club, claiming it had already increased property values. She projected a slide showing the club's budget, a mess of inflated numbers and vague expenses. Then she turned to new business. "Item number 1, she announced, her eyes sweeping the room until they landed on me. "Enforcement action regarding Parcel 12B. That was my address. Mr. Miller continues to defy community standards and has refused to acknowledge the authority of the Lakeside Fishing Club. The board has voted to issue a final compliance order. Mr. Miller's boat and trailer are to be removed from the property permanently within 72 hours, or they will be impounded at his expense. Furthermore, a permanent restraining order will be filed, prohibiting him from approaching the lake access points." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. This was it. This was the public execution she had been building toward for months. She looked at me, a cold, triumphant smirk on her face. "Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say?" I stood up slowly. The room went silent. I could feel every eye on me. I walked to the front of the room, not to the podium where she stood, but to the whiteboard on the side. I picked up a dry erase marker. "Thank you, Karen. I do have a few questions, actually," I said, my voice steady and clear. "First, could you show me in the HOA bylaws where it gives the association the authority to regulate private property on the lake?" Karen scoffed. "We've been over this. The board has broad powers. And the community voted to grant the fishing club management rights." I smiled politely. "I see. And the fishing club pays the HOA for those rights. Is that correct?" "Of course," she said impatiently. "It's a standard lease agreement." "A lease agreement for what, exactly?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. "For the lakefront common area. For the docks. The boat ramp." Her voice faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You're wasting our time, Mr. Miller." "Am I?" I turned to the whiteboard and drew a simple map of the neighborhood, showing the houses and the lake. "See, I had the same question. So I went down to the county to get some clarity." It's funny what you find when you start looking at the actual property records. I uncapped a folder I'd been carrying and pulled out a large, certified copy of a plat map. I tacked it to the board. With a red marker, I traced the boundary of the HOA's common area. The red line stopped cleanly at the edge of the water. "As per the founding documents of this community, the HOA's jurisdiction ends at the high water mark," I explained, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You've never had any authority over the docks, the boat ramp, or the lake itself." A wave of confusion washed over the room. People were whispering, looking at their own copies of the agenda as if the answer might be printed there. Karen's face turned from smug to furious. That's a misinterpretation of outdated zoning maps. We have documents." "Oh, I know you have documents, Karen," I said, my voice hardening. I pulled another paper from my folder. It was a letter my lawyer had received from the bank that managed the Blackwood Trust. "I'm sure you have documents like this one. This is a copy of the cease and desist letter you received from the Trust's attorneys 3 years ago, telling the HOA to stop trespassing on their property. I wonder why that was never brought up at a meeting." The color drained from her face. She was cornered. Linda Park was staring at her, mouth agape. "This is ridiculous. Slander. You have no proof," Karen sputtered. "Actually," I said, pulling out the final glorious document, "I do have proof. See, the thing about the Blackwood Trust is that they were tired of dealing with it. So when I contacted them about the ongoing trespassing, they were more than happy to solve the problem permanently. They sold it." I unfolded the document and held it up for everyone to see. It was a grant deed, stamped and sealed by the county recorder. "As of 4:15 p.m. this past Tuesday," I announced, letting my voice fill the room, "I am the legal owner of the lake, the land underneath it, the docks, the boat ramp, and a 50-foot buffer of land around the entire shoreline." Stunned silence. You could have heard a pin drop. The smug expressions on the faces of the fishing club members melted into disbelief. George from next door was staring at me, his jaw hanging open. I turned to face Karen directly. "Your fishing club's lease is with a party that never had the right to grant it, which means it's void. As the new owner, I am hereby terminating any and all access agreements. Your club is dissolved. Your gate is coming down tomorrow. And your members are to consider themselves trespassing if they set foot past the high water mark without my express written permission." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, for the final blow, I added, "But don't worry. I believe the lake should be for everyone in this community. So, starting next week, access will be free for all residents. No fees, no clubs, no Karens." The room erupted. It started with a few people clapping, then more. Bill was on his feet, cheering. The tide of public opinion, so carefully manipulated by Karen for months, turned against her in a single, beautiful instant. She just stood there, speechless, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated humiliation as the community she thought she owned celebrated her downfall right in front of her. I expected Karen to retreat, to lick her wounds and disappear. That was my mistake. People who build their entire identity around a fragile illusion of power don't just walk away when the illusion shatters. They try to burn down the whole theater. The day after the meeting, Sarge came over with a bolt cutter and a portable angle grinder. We made short work of the members-only gate. As the sparks flew and the thick steel groaned, neighbors started coming out of their houses. At first they just watched from a distance, but soon George and a few others came over to help us haul the pieces away. There was a sense of liberation in the air, like a years-long storm had finally broken. Kids, including Lily, were running down to the docks for the first time in months, fishing rods in hand. For a few days, there was peace. But Karen wasn't done. She was just regrouping for a different kind of attack. Her new strategy was pure sabotage. It started small. Vicious rumors began circulating on the neighborhood social media page, posted by anonymous accounts I knew were her and Linda Park. They claimed I was planning to develop the shoreline, that I was going to charge exorbitant access fees, that I was dumping chemicals in the water from my boat. It was a desperate attempt to poison the well of goodwill I had built, but this time, people weren't buying it. Neighbors I'd never even spoken to were posting in my defense, calling out the lies. The community was no longer afraid of her. When the smear campaign failed, she escalated. A few days later, I was doing my morning walk around the lake path. My lake path. When I saw it, a dark, oily sheen was spreading out from the shore near the common area, and a handful of dead fish were floating belly up at the water's edge. The smell of gasoline was heavy in the air. My heart sank. This wasn't just a petty grudge anymore. This was criminal. I knew instantly who was responsible, but knowing it and proving it were two different things. I called the Environmental Protection Agency and the local sheriff's department. While I waited, I remembered the one advantage I had. I'm a technical guy. I think in terms of systems and evidence. When I bought the lake, I also inherited the liability. On Sarge's advice, I'd installed a few discreet, high-resolution surveillance cameras, the kind hunters use on game trails. They were motion-activated and had excellent night vision. One was pointed directly at the boat ramp. That night, after the investigators had taken their samples and left, I sat in my workshop and pulled the memory card. My hands were shaking slightly as I scrolled through the footage from the previous night. And there she was. At 2:13 a.m., a grainy but unmistakable figure walked down to the water's edge. It was Karen. She was carrying 2 red gasoline cans. The video showed her methodically pouring the contents into the lake, right where the dead fish had collected. She was so blinded by rage, she hadn't even bothered to cover her face. I had her. Cold, hard, undeniable proof. The next morning, I didn't post the video online. I didn't send it to the HOA. I walked it straight down to the sheriff's office. The deputy I spoke with recognized me from the initial report. When I played the video for him on my laptop, his friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a grim professionalism. "We'll be paying Mrs. Whitman a visit," he said. But Karen wasn't going down without a final desperate fight. As the deputies were on their way to her house, my phone rang. It was the police dispatcher. "Sir, we have a 911 call reporting a domestic disturbance at your address. The caller said you were threatening her with a weapon." I was stunned. I was standing in my own kitchen, and Martha was in the garden. "That's impossible," I said. "There's no one here but my wife and me." I realized what she was doing. It was a classic swatting attempt, a last-ditch effort to turn the tables and paint me as the villain. I quickly explained the situation, the ongoing harassment, the video I had just provided. To my relief, the dispatcher listened. "Okay, sir. We're still required to respond, but I'll update the responding officers with this context. 2 patrol cars rolled up my driveway a few minutes later, their lights off. They were cautious but professional. While they were talking to me on my porch, one of the officers got a call on his radio. I heard snippets of the conversation. Suspect in custody. Confessed to filing a false report. Karen's final pathetic gambit had failed. They had picked her up at her house, gasoline cans still in her garage, right before she tried to send a SWAT team to mine. As the police cars pulled away, my neighbors started to come out. They had seen the whole thing. The quiet solidarity was gone, replaced by a shared sense of outrage. That night, Sarge and Bill helped me organize a neighborhood watch. It wasn't about watching for criminals. It was about watching out for each other. We set up a call list, a schedule for people to walk the lake path. People brought over food. They offered to help with the cleanup. In her final act of desperation, Karen hadn't broken our community. She had forged it into something stronger. She had tried to poison the lake, but all she had done was expose her own toxicity for everyone to see. The fallout from Karen's arrest was swift and devastating for her. Faced with the surveillance video, she pleaded guilty to illegal dumping of hazardous materials and filing a false police report. The judge didn't go easy on her. She was sentenced to community service, ironically, with the county's park cleanup crew, a hefty fine that probably wiped out her fishing club's slush fund, and 2 years of probation. But the legal consequences were nothing compared to the social ones. News of her crime spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting, but this time it wasn't to shame me. One by one, Karen's allies on the board, including a pale and terrified-looking Linda Park, tendered their resignations. They didn't want to be associated with her toxicity anymore. The entire structure of power she had so carefully built over the years crumbled to dust in a single week. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn a month later. They moved out in the middle of a Tuesday, not even bothering to say goodbye. The HOA, now stripped of its tyrannical leadership, was forced to reform. An interim board was elected, with Bill, the quiet retiree, reluctantly agreeing to serve as president. Their first official act was to formally issue a public apology to my family and to void every fine Karen had ever issued that couldn't be explicitly justified by the bylaws. Hundreds of them were thrown out. The reign of terror was officially over. The lake began to heal, both literally and figuratively. The state's environmental team supervised the cleanup, and thankfully, the damage was contained quickly. But the real healing was happening among the neighbors. The suspicion and fear that had divided us for years started to melt away. People started talking to each other again at the mailboxes, not in whispers but in friendly conversations. That first weekend after Karen was gone, I organized a community cleanup day for the shoreline. I expected a handful of people to show up. Instead, nearly half the neighborhood was there, armed with rakes and trash bags. We worked side by side, clearing away years of neglect. George from next door, who had voted against me in that meeting, worked harder than anyone. At the end of the day, he came over to me, his face glistening with sweat. "Jack," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, I was scared. You weren't." I just clapped him on the shoulder. No more words were needed. We ended the day with a massive potluck barbecue on the shore. Kids were splashing in the water, families were fishing off the docks, and the air was filled with laughter instead of tension. It felt like the neighborhood was breathing again. Lily was there with her friends, her tackle box fully restocked. She ran up to me, her eyes sparkling with excitement, to show me a small bass she had caught. "I'm teaching them how to tie a proper knot, Dad," she said, beaming with pride. Seeing her there, happy and confident by the water she loved, was worth every single sleepless night and every dollar I had spent. My family was whole again. Our sanctuary was safe. A few months later, as the leaves started to turn, I finished a project I'd been working on in my spare time. I'd built a simple, sturdy wooden bench in my workshop. With the help of Sarge and Bill, I installed it on a small bluff overlooking the water, the one that had been Sarah's favorite spot. I had carved a small, simple brass plaque and fixed it to the backrest. It didn't have her name on it. It just said, "For all our neighbors, welcome to your lake." Martha and I went down to see it at sunset. She ran her hand over the smooth wood and read the plaque, a tear rolling down her cheek. "She would have loved this," Martha said softly. "She would have loved what you did." We sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The water was calm and quiet, a perfect mirror of the peace we had fought so hard to reclaim. I had started this whole thing just trying to protect my boat and my memories, but it had become something much bigger. It showed me that one person, armed with the truth and a bit of practical skill, can stand up to a bully. It showed me that a community is only as strong as the willingness of its members to stand up for each other. And it proved that petty power, no matter how intimidating it seems, can always be beaten by heart, competence, and a bold move when it counts. Justice isn't just something that happens in a courtroom. Sometimes you have to build it yourself, right in your own backyard.